Hi, everyone. Welcome to Poet. I'm Radha Marcum, and today I have the pleasure of talking to Katherine DiBella Seluja, author of Point of Entry. Before I introduce you to Katherine, I'd like to invite you to become a subscriber of the Substack newsletter. If you aren't already, just go to poet.substack.com and subscribe for free. In it, you'll find interviews like this one, plus helpful tips on writing and publishing books of poetry. So today, again, I am thrilled to introduce you to Katherine DiBella Seluja. Katherine is the author of Gather the Night from UNM Press in 2018 and the co-author with Tina Carlson and Stella Reed of We Are Meant to Carry Water, which was out from Three House Press in 2019. Her poetry and microfiction has been published in Intima Journal, Naugatuck River Review, South 85 Sin Fronteras, and Bosque, among other journals. Her poem November Fruit is permanently installed at the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation in Taos, New Mexico. And she is the poetry editor of Unbroken Journal. Is that correct?
Yep. One of the poetry editors. One of them, yeah.
And her most recent collection, which we're going to talk about today, is Point of Entry, which was released in August of this year by UNM Press. And the book focuses on immigration and ancestry. So it should be a very interesting conversation. So Katherine, welcome to Poet.
Thank you, Radha. Appreciate it.
So this is your second full-length collection, solo collection that you've put out. And I'm just really curious to know how this process was different, how the process was different for this book versus your first full-length collection.
Sure. Well, the writing and organizing process was very different. I mean, purely related to time in the trench experience. I mean, just the way that would be no surprise. But Gather the Night, I began the first book. I started writing the poems really, frankly, only several years after I started writing poetry more seriously, really focusing on poetry. So some of that work is, I mean, it's great work, it's good work, but it's younger work, I want to say. So the process of writing these poems that have, that are now comprising Point of Entry, for me internally had a different experience to it. I just think my toolbox was bigger and I had more resources and I think a larger network of support, in the creative process. So like the actual building of the book was, I don't know, was much more like multi-sensory and kind of tactile for me in a different kind of way. I mean, there's times you need your head and your intellect, but I felt like I used a lot of other approaches and resources into Point of Entry.
What were some of those approaches and resources that you felt were most influential for this book?
Yeah. Well, I had work that came out of a number of different workshops, an ongoing work that, I did with a number of different poets that I really admire. One that comes to mind is Amy Beater, who's a wonderful poet here in Albuquerque and published by Tupelo, and I believe her first book by UNM Press as well. And Tina Carlson and I will often we do sort of chunks of work, I call it, with Amy. So we'll just do, some really simple prompts, and generative work, and we do it all via email, but she kind of gives us our assignment and our focus. And so as the collection of poems for Point of Entry were starting to come together, I did one or two sessions with Amy, but with the focus and intention of creating more and kind of varied, interesting work for the book. So a good handful of those poems are, made it into the final cut of Point of Entry. So that's one example, and other workshops along the way. I mean, again, I think I had a better understanding of being able to access a wider array of support
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I also suspect, since you've published a work that was collaboratively generated and
Mhm.
produced, there's a deep respect for that that collaborative piece, even in a solo book, right? That you are getting support from peers, from mentors, from the accountability of a workshop. The work is uniquely yours to do, and yet those, those structures, or that help, that that energy that you get from those relationships, seems to me, in your case, to have really helped you generate, right, and then to complete the book.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's just occurring to me as you're saying that, Rada, there's a fascinating sort of collaboration that happens with the theme, and as that became clarified, and the intention, I mean, internally then, but I feel very clear, like the poet side of me is collaborating with the theme, or what I'm going for, and in this sense, I mean, a homage and honoring of my ancestors in collaboration with acknowledgement of modern day, our current day immigration situation. And so that was this internal collaboration that was happening, and I actually never quite articulate. I was experiencing it, but I never quite articulated it that way before. So
Mhm.
you just talking sort of clarified that for me, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about the book's themes, and how you came into recognizing those themes in the book,
Yeah, thank
in the
you.
work.
Um, a fascinating thing, I was talking about this at one of the launch readings that I've looked at over time, is watching the themes that we continue to feel intrigued by, over time as artists, or drawn to. I mean, some people say obsessed with, but I feel like drawn to, or that resonate for us. And clearly, in the actual collaborative book previously that I did with Tina and Stella, I was already thinking a lot about my ancestors and immigration and migrants. And so the migrant girl in that book came to be one of the main voices. But that migrant girl, in reality, for me internally, was based on my maternal grandmother, Serafina, who was 8 years old when she immigrated to the US with her parents from northern Italy. So a number of the migrant girl pieces, I was doing it in my, kind of imagined or envisioned voice of this young girl coming to a whole new world and a whole new country. So that began there. But when that book was done, as so often happens, I knew she had more to say, basically. I mean, and to me, for me, is one of the most exciting things to realize, oh, wait, that, this voice, this subject, this theme isn't done yet. And then I realized, okay, I have more I want to explore. So that led me to almost all of the ancestor type poems in this current book, in Point of Entry, just a deepening of that voice. I started to ask myself, I mean, a number of the stories are biographical and in the oral tradition handed down from my mother and my grandmother and my godmother. And a number of them have a lot of that information, but then honestly, I elaborated as well. I took artistic license and filled in the pieces I didn't know. All of those individuals are not with us in this world any longer. So I, didn't have the access to call them up and ask them more detailed questions. But the backbone of a number of the stories are the stories I was told. So I found myself really wanting to memorialize those, and have some kind of honoring of our family stories within this poetry realm.
Mm, that's beautiful. Yeah. Um, and yeah, that idea that the seed of the next book is often in the previous work.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
heard that said, and I think I was listening to an interview with Jory Graham,
Hmm.
who said that, and so here's a poet who's just working on these immense scales, right? And
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, That's beautiful the way that happened. So would you be so kind as to read us a poem to get a taste for
Sure. Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I was just talking all about the ancestor poems, but I feel called to actually read the opening poem in the book, which is more directly related to the other major topic, if not theme, but topic of the book, which is issues along our southern border and the status of immigration in this country currently. And so it is called Desert Manifest, the first poem, and it opens with an epigraph. An epigraph is a small piece from the Hippocratic Oath, which is the oath new doctors take when they begin their practice. Desert Manifest. There is an art to medicine as well as science, and warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug. A doctor labors in Sonoran heat, cataloging bones. The work is grueling. Sometimes she whispers to the bones, rarely they whisper back. A group of bones occasionally found together, but more often a femur or an ulna, the long medial bone of the forearm separated from the rest. Coyote, turkey vulture. Its shaft is triangular. And the desert is their ocean-faring ship, a list of names scribed across the sand. At the edge of sleep, some slim truth or partial answer to her list of many questions, so many without name or identification. This isn't what she had trained for, not what she had imagined. Her classmates envied her dissections. The secret, never ask the body to give up its truths alone. Each bone is indexed and sent to the state lab for genetic confirmation. Let each one place an X upon the line beside their name. Not what she had imagined. Coyote, turkey vulture. She thought her own practice. Somewhere her name would be known for midnight house calls, kitchen table consultations. And the desert exhales its sail wings, moves its passengers forward. The doctor brushes dried blood from a scapula that serves as origin of the muscles that move the arm. Let an accounting be done. An accounting done.
It's so beautiful and haunting, the rhythm of it and the way that the poem is built out of these details, and that's that sense of story that's underneath, sort of as the engine, and yet there's a real sense of mystery at the same time. What's not revealed feels as important as what is revealed in the poem. And I think it's a really delicate balance to strike, but a balance that seems important to the subject matter.
Exactly. So much, in so many levels, right? With our current immigration situation, so much is not revealed. There's so much unknown. So much is happening behind closed doors, decisions being made that impact thousands and tens of thousands of lives. And then down to the micro level of unknown bones, literally unknown and anonymous bones found in the desert. I mean, what could be more unspoken than that?
Yeah. So as you did these chunks of work, or began to accumulate the poems for this book, and then maybe sat down and started this process of organizing them into a complete whole, were there any poems that you decided to leave out of the manuscript? And if so, why didn't they make the cut?
Yeah. Oh, yes, there were. Lots of changes. Up until the almost the very last minute, it felt like. I'd say there was, I shouldn't call it a slush pile, but I'm going to. Maybe a bone pile. Bone pile is probably better.
Mm.
Probably a good, probably 15, a good dozen or 15, I bet. That it would expand and then shrink, that process. I've heard Dana Levin talk about it so perfectly. It's like sifting down like a funnel, and it sort of grows and then tightens and grows, and it sort of is like the movement actually of a chest, right? Respirating, when I think about it, this breathing, living thing. So it would really vary what was included in the many iterations of laying it all out on the floor or the dining room table. But finally, there had to have been 10 or 12 that I just, some started to feel like redundant. Some started to feel superfluous, and some just started to feel like they just didn't really make the cut for me. Maybe my strongest critic is right here, but they just didn't really feel done enough, or there were a few I felt attached to and I wanted them to be ready, but the poems are going, no, 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 I'm not ready, and they just weren't cooked, so to speak, long enough or simmered. And there's honestly one or two that I wished I had added in, that either, or an angle, how that is, that I really enjoy looking at things from lots of different, or as many points of view or perspectives as I can think of, or it occurs to me, or I read about, and I really enjoy that a lot. But it seems like there's always more. And so after the final draft was sent in, I definitely, there were one or two more I wished I had finished or even written. I was like, oh, that would have been great. These little extra little gaps I could have filled in. But, maybe that can go into the next one, right? So I I actually really love that process. It can sort of drive you crazy when you're in it, but there's a way. That's the creative part. And it just, I don't know, I really, really enjoy having my fingerprints all over that. I like to do it and then get feedback on it, but I really like to, even when it's totally frustrating me, I like to just try to square off with it and sit down in the room with the poems and say, okay, let's see what it looks like today. And I just kept doing that again and again and again.
I love your description of it being like a living, breathing organism, because it really is, and maybe in a bit we'll talk a little bit about what happens after that process ends, right, and the book's out in the world. But before we do that, I wanted to touch on another thing. So you said points of view, which made me think, many points of view, and you have this really compelling title, which is Point of Entry. So I'm curious, do the points of view and that idea of point of entry have some overlap? And how did you get to that title? And what does that title mean for you?
Well, so the truth is, oh God, I can't believe really. The truth is, it came to me in a dream, or it was related to a dream that I had. That sounds, I don't know how that sounds, but that's actually the truth. There was a
It sounds
dream I had.
perfect.
Okay,
We
but
all
it was
want to have
in,
things come to us in dreams.
I don't know why it sounds like sort of it's hitting me. This is sounding very cliche. It came to me in a dream state, but I had a dream about it. But a very in very important timing, which was Tina, Stell, and I, and a number of others were in the middle of a incredible workshop with Carolyn Forche a number of years ago in Taos. that Lisa Gett most generously hosted and invited us to. And it was, a workshop of a lifetime as far as I'm concerned. And we were given an assignment. And so the title poem that's in about the middle of the book, called Point of Entry, it's just a really short little piece, is one of the assignments, that I wrote during that workshop. And I had some kind of dream that I don't even totally remember the dream anymore, but that kind of triggered it in the pre-dawn hours. And then the title just sort of like dropped in. So in the moment, I mean, I really held it for a long time as a working title, so that was a, number, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. So I thought it was working title. And then I was getting closer to actually, having to send in the final manuscript. And I took another tour around the whole long block, so to speak, of the book, and just reconsidered all, I just did a whole exercise. I'm reconsidering all kinds of different titles. And got opinions, and asked it a trusted circle and my poetry mentor, and at the end of the day came back to plan A, so to speak, and just stuck with it. So that's really where it sort of came from. Point of Entry itself, I mean, it sounds a lot like Port of Entry, of course. It is a little bit of a play off of that in terms of where immigrants would enter a country. But I originally envisioned it as all the different kinds of points of entry. There's a grouping in the second half of the book of birth poems. And, birth is a whole other point of entry, obviously. And there's a little more in the background kind of theme of a soul entering a body. There's a few different poems that talk about that. And that's a sort of point of entry. They may be a little more subtle, but they're there. And so those are some of the different ways I thought about it. I mean, where we come from out of the lineage of our ancestors is another point of entry. I mean, I think there are many points of entry.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the different aspects that were standing behind the title for me, and looks like the title stuck. So
It's amazing. That doesn't always happen, right? The working title often isn't the title that the book ends up bearing. But I also think that, the book in itself is sort of this gift of each poem is a point of entry into these themes, into exploring with you these highly relevant stories, and the current state of affairs. So I really appreciate the title on that level, where I'm being invited, right? A good title can invite the reader to enter a book in a certain manner. So I really appreciated the title in that way.
Thank you. Thanks.
Would you like to read another poem?
Yeah, sure. I don't know what poem to read now.
Maybe the title poem.
Okay, sure. Let's see. It's true. It's funny. I don't read it as often, interestingly enough, the title poem. Okay. So here it is. Point of Entry. I can be anywhere when it happens. Sliding from the roof, just returning from flight. The pressure, as if from the palm of a hand. It can be any time. As dusk is descending, in between sleeps. A firm but steady push, propulsion through the wrist. Behind my right shoulder, at the base of the bony plate, there, a wing emerging.
Lovely.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, maybe we'll go to this question about working with different types of presses next. So
Oh,
you've worked
okay.
with a university press on 2 books, and
Yeah.
you've had this experience working with a small independent publisher not associated with any university, Three at Taos Press. Any insights on how those experiences differ, or things that you were surprised to learn about working with small presses through either one of those experiences?
Um, I mean, there are certainly differences. Um, I don't know. I don't know if really surprises. I think I was lucky because I had the first book, Gather the Night, with the university press, and that was when I was completely publication naive, and just like, you're kind of just so grateful that anyone wants to publish your work. That's kind of how I felt. So I was just like open to whatever the price. Like, okay, 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 and I was just mostly grateful and open to the process. And then the independent press experience was in the middle, and then back with UNM again. So the independent press with Andrea Watson was, sandwiched in between. Um, and they're just really different experiences. With the university press, it feels like a longer, larger, bigger, I'd say in some ways more formal process, because it is. The manuscript is submitted. There's a certain amount of wait time to see if the press is interested, the acquisitions editor. Then, as part of that, of course, it's sent out to independent peer review, which can be grueling while you're waiting. I mean, that could take 6 months easily. But when that process is done, and after you've made it through those hoops, so to speak, and if the manuscript is accepted, you get to rest on this very strong foundation of knowing 2 or 3 completely anonymous to you and unknown to you readers have found the work worthwhile, and gave it a thumbs up. And that's really reassuring. It definitely was for me. I'm a later in life poet, let's say. I've had an entire healthcare career.
Mhm.
So, I found it really, reassuring, that confidence it gave me.
Mhm.
An aspect of working with Three at Taos is that there was that sense of much more hands-on. And Andrea Watson, as you know well, is an incredible, incredible editor. I think it seems to me she loves that part the most.
Mhm.
And we volleyed the manuscript back and forth multiple times, and in much shorter kind of real time, much more quickly. We knew she was or we believed she was interested, and we just batted it back and forth. Well, let's try this and let's try this. And then that work was also with 3 authors, so we were kicking it back and forth, amongst the 3 of us also. So there was a different sense of collaboration also, honestly, with the collaborative book, that we were collaborating with Andrea Watson as well, that I really appreciated. And now, with Point of Entry back to UNM, which was lucky enough that they'd made it clear they were interested in seeing a next solo collection. So this time, at least the territory was known. It was different. There weren't I don't think there were really any surprises, or nothing, just good surprises, nothing unpleasant. So it's just a different quality. And you have to be patient. You have to be willing to be patient and understand, of course, that any press, but certainly a university press, poetry generally is, it's the little corner over here. I mean, important and very important series, but there's many, many other books and texts that are being looked at.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for those insights. I think
Yeah.
it's helpful to hear,
Yeah.
and for especially for new authors who are, just publishing a first collection, or, starting to think about, well, where do I want to send my work? It's good to know, what those experiences look like on the other side. Because I think so often we're just focused on getting the publication.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Patience is really valuable, and I mean, it's hard, it's our baby. It's the thing, us as the individual author or artist, that's the thing that matters to us. And it can be hard to step back and realize, okay, wait, I'm one of a number of other authors, in the stable. And it's important to get that perspective, I think.
Yeah. So we chatted a little bit before we jumped on this call about having this relationship, this ongoing relationship to the body of work now that it's in a book, a physical thing. And I'm just curious if you want to say a few words about that ongoing relationship and what it's been like for you.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. I think I can, I mean, I'm by no means a novelist. I write microfiction, I mean, if I get a couple of hundred words, that's great, in fiction land. But I've certainly heard many, many fiction writers talk about this sense of mourning and missing, like, characters after the book is completed. And, for sometimes they walk around for a long time. And I think we've all had that experience as readers. If there's a book we really, really love, or you finish it and you just kind of keep thinking about the characters. So just right now, this minute, the thing that's most fascinating to me is how I'm thinking about the poems that are now kind of living here, not in the laptop, not, roaming around my head, but, concretely inside this book. But I'm still, I I kind of still think about the poems, not all the time, but individual poems with their own personality, almost as if they're a character, their own mood, their own flavor. So just right now, I'm thinking about, how much I want to revisit them. I mean, certainly in ongoing readings, but also even just for myself, it's like reopening a closet with a whole wonderful wardrobe in it, that you haven't looked at in a while, or taking out the big box of Christmas ball decorations that you haven't seen in a few years, or, or something like that. Not that it's been that long, with this collection of poems, but there is some way it goes into some other compartment in our brain and internally, where it's still alive, but we, as the creator, we think about it differently. I don't have, I feel like I'm just rambling here. This is kind of happening right now. I mean, the book's been published since August. So I'm kind of, they're just things I'm thinking about right now and noticing how I feel and how I think about it. And I think I mean, certainly it's still in its babyhood, in terms of being out in the world. But I think it's so important to keep supporting books long, after their baby and toddlerhood. And, I mean, I think some people do that really well. And I think others, I've noticed, oh, well, that book came out last year. And it's, we're in that whole thing about the short news cycle that we're all addicted to now, or we're so exposed to anyway. And I think we have to really fight against that, work against that. What if we had done that to Mozart or Beethoven? Oh my God. So keeping the work alive and keeping it finding meaning, even certainly externally by interacting this way, but also internally, within us. But it's tricky, because then we want to go on to, okay, what's the next project, right? For many of us artists, we talk about the creative part being kind of the buzz, like the exciting part. So I'm saying both, I guess. I'm saying both.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
don't know
always
if I'm
think
giving
about
you very
books.
coherent answers, Radha.
Oh, no, that was beautifully
Sort of a rambling answer.
No, I mean, I think it's a very complicated, it's a complicated thing to describe, this relationship to the work, and I appreciate your clarity about how it has changed, right? Because I think as authors, we don't necessarily, again, our focus is on getting the poem to the page and then shaping it on the page and polishing it up and then getting it ready for being in the world, right? And then once it is in the world, oh, it turns out there's this whole other stage, right? And
Yeah.
I think what I appreciate in what you're saying is that you're inviting writers to have an ongoing dialogue, right? Again, back to that idea of collaboration. Like we're constantly in this like collaborative space, even with work that has been printed on the page, because contexts change, right? So I think about poems that are in my first book, or even in my MFA thesis, and things will come back to me where I feel like, whoa, actually that's so relevant now. Like it was relevant 20 years ago, and all of a sudden it's popping into my consciousness. So it's not so much that I want to go back and re-engage with that poem in a, like revise it. But I think it's a way in which we are, to your point earlier, re-engaging with themes that are important to us, that are perennial and coming up in the context in which we find ourselves in our lives.
Yeah. And actually, I'm thinking as you're saying that it would be fascinating to re-engage, have a dialogue with, like, let's say that poem you're thinking about from your MFA thesis, not necessarily rewriting it, but like responding to it now. I mean, that would be a really fascinating poem or series of poems. I did a workshop online with Ada Limon, and she talks about that. She was just sort of suggesting different strategies to generate new work and explore new places. And she was talking about how she loves to, so to speak, interrogate and have and dialogue with her own work, her previous work. So that just popped into my mind as you were talking about your MFA work. Because that'd be fascinating for you, what the discovery process would be, and something I'm sure very interesting for the reader would come out of that. Because it's all, I think also I'm pushing against, and it's occurring to me that what some people refer to as sort of more the capitalist, notion that we're, so steeped in, and we really have to, some of us work hard to push back against, for the product, right? Because we start writing, we start organizing poems, we start envisioning, oh, this could be a manuscript, we submit it, we hope we get it published, somebody wants us, so it's all, you're on this track to produce a thing, in a sense. I mean, it's your art, but it's a thing. And then after the thing has been produced, sort of what we're talking about is the then what. But really, the value and the resonance and the echo, the reverberation, hopefully moves on. It's not just caught in between the covers, of this.
Yeah.
But that's a very, very, it is, I mean, a very different way of thinking about, quote, production, right? Because it's dynamic and a little more fluid and ongoing. I mean, the way life should be, hopefully, is.
Well, I think that's one of the core differentiators, right, of poetry and how poetry functions.
Yeah.
In
I
the
agree.
world. It is very fluid and ongoing, even when it seems to be static. It's never static, right? And I feel like that's the gift that your poems give to us in these stories and in these moments that you're sharing through this book, that that sense that this is ongoing, right? These are ongoing pieces. It isn't quantifiable, right? That's part of the issue with that productive mindset, or that sort of news cycle, right? It's like, okay, let's nail it down, and
right here it is.
Dialogue stops here, right? And poetry saying, no, let's open this back up, and and acknowledge that these are very complex, ongoing, dynamic, contextual stories and situations.
Yeah.
So would you maybe like to read one more poem?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So I'd really just feel called to read this poem that I had mentioned earlier. There's a kind of a grouping of birth or birth-related poems. And I feel called to read this one as part of also speaking to the ongoing process and life. And frankly, also in honor of the political situation in this country regarding birth and women's very personal internal decisions around birth, giving birth or not giving birth. So here's the one that wants to be read. This is a poem that I dedicated to my youngest daughter, Camila. And the title is borrowed from a line of Willa Cather. To be part of something complete and great. As that stunning release when your newborn pushes headfirst into her life, yells at the sharp snap of lung sails unfurling. The cord still pulses and she is unfolding, already too large to return to that cushioned grotto. You are both covered in salt. She, the amniotic brine, you, the tears of your labor. She is offered to you a coffer of living myrrh. And as she mews and searches the truffle of your breast, you pull her close and whisper, to this future you will suckle. You are most welcome.
What a beautiful way to end our conversation. Thank you, Katherine.
Sure, sure.
So
Thank you
in
so much.
closing, where can folks find more information about you as a writer? Where can they buy the book?
Sure. Well, they can certainly order the book directly from University of New Mexico Press. That would be wonderful and a great way to support the university press. It's also on Amazon and available in the Kindle or ebook form. And they can find out more about me by Googling me. I have my website, KatherineDiBellaSeluja.com, as well as social media, primarily Instagram right now for me, social media wise. And the handle's the same at Katherine DiBella Seluja.
Great, great. Well, Katherine, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Radha. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.